This is the CitizenLink Report.
If you find our insights helpful, would you support our video efforts? Your gift of $25 or more goes a long ways. Covers the crew, lights, cameras, all that. Just click on Donate. Thanks from all of us.
Kansas and Kentucky House members pass religious freedom bills. Another business loses in court over Obamacare. And the Obama administration lawyers submit briefs in support of same-sex marriage. This is the CitizenLink Report. Hi, I'm Kim Trobee, along with Bruce Hausknecht, who tracks religious freedom issues for CitizenLink. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Kim.
You know, it seems like you don't have to look very far today in the news to see people of faith coming under challenge all the time for that faith. What's going on in our country?
Well, I think it's definitely because of the increasing secularization of society in general. And then we see it end up in our laws through things like the HHS mandate, which we've been talking about for months now, which forces employers to do things against their religious conscience. In fact, we're hearing more and more comments from lawmakers on the left that equate religion with bigotry, and it cannot be tolerated, and so they are forcing people of faith to the sidelines and, even worse, punishing them.
Now, last week, the Kansas House and the Kentucky House both passed a religious freedom bill. Talk about what those bills do.
Well, many of our viewers may not realize that our religious protections against actions of state governments may not be as comprehensive as our protections against actions of the federal government. We are all familiar with the First Amendment. We may even be familiar with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that was passed in 1993, but states sometimes are not protected because they have not passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. That's what Kentucky and Kansas are attempting to do, and they join about 16 other states that have passed those. And if you add to that some other states with court decisions that operate just like a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, there are probably over half of our states that have that state protection, which means that the remaining states are left unprotected.
So when you say Religious Freedom Restoration Act, we also call it RFRA. And what does that do? That's a federal law, right?
Yes. In 1993, Congress overwhelmingly passed this statute in response to a very bad Supreme Court decision from 1990 that basically put a hole right in the First Amendment's religion clauses. And everyone was outraged. The left, the right, Congress, the president, they passed this law restoring what's called a strict scrutiny or compelling interest test on actions of government that intrude on religious conscience. Even though those laws may look, in general, they may look neutral, they may not mention religion, they still intrude. That's what the HHS mandate does, is a perfect example of this. So that federal statute protects us against actions like the HHS mandate, or so we hope when it gets done with the lawsuits. But at the state level, we may not have that protection.
If somebody wanted to find out if their state has a RFRA or a Religious Freedom Act, how do they find that out?
Well, most states have very difficult statutory codes to go through. They're usually online, but the quickest way is to call your legislator, talk to someone in his office, ask the basic question. And another way is call one of the family policy councils that is associated with CitizenLink and ask them.
Good. You can go to CitizenLink.com to find out your family policy council in your state. Okay, Bruce, let's turn now to the Obamacare HHS mandate. You've mentioned it a couple of times already. Explain what the issue is with the health care law.
Well, this goes back to 2010 with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Along came the Health and Human Services Secretary last year and finalized a rule which essentially required employers of over 50 people to provide free contraceptives and some that can possibly cause abortions, and plus sterilizations and things like that. That started an objection from churches, from nonprofit religious organizations, even from for-profit businesses owned by people of faith. They ended up filing, so far we have over 48 lawsuits that have been filed against the federal government, against the HHS mandate, and more every month are being filed. And those are in courts in various stages of completion.
Now, we do have a scorecard, or at least we're keeping track. Where are we now with court decisions, wins and losses?
Right. Well, in terms of churches, churches have received a complete exemption from the Obama administration having to comply with this mandate. Nonprofit religious corporations are still waiting until this August to see if there's a further accommodation coming. The one that has been proposed is simply an accounting gimmick that does nothing to really protect the conscience of organizations that are organized for religious reasons and they're nonprofits. Now, the for-profit companies that have sued, and there's about 17 of them thus far, owned by small families or mom and pop stores, companies, and some even large like Hobby Lobby have sued because they operate their for-profit business on faith-based principles, and they object to being forced to provide these things. Now, of those 17, we have about 12 decisions granting for-profit businesses an injunction, meaning the courts have stopped any fines from happening while the lawsuit proceeds. But in 5 other cases involving for-profit companies were owned by people of faith, the courts have denied that relief. So we have this dual track of people that have been protected and people that are not protected as we go forward. And supposedly these taxes and fines are accruing.
That was my next question, was what happens to the businesses who haven't got an injunction? Will they be fined between now and August, and how much?
Well, they probably don't get fined between now and then. What happens is the IRS considers them to be collectible on the next corporate tax return that those companies file. So I'm still remaining optimistic, and I'm hoping that the IRS won't collect from some of these businesses when some of the other businesses have been awarded an injunction by federal courts. I don't have any basis on which to be optimistic about the IRS, but I'm really hoping that they won't attempt to collect those.
And Bruce, we're going to wrap up today with one last question. Last week, briefs were submitted to the Supreme Court by the Obama administration with regard to the same-sex marriage case that they'll hear starting later this month. Tell us briefly about that.
Well, there are 2 cases before the Supreme Court on the 26th and 27th of this month. The first one is the Prop 8 case out of California, their marriage amendment that defines marriage as between one man and one woman. That technically didn't involve the federal government, although there are claims there that the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution prohibits the state from enacting a marriage amendment. The other case, the DOMA case out of New York, was the one that the federal government already was in. But this last week, the Obama administration, Department of Justice, acting on behalf of the administration, filed a brief in the Prop 8 case arguing in favor of same-sex marriage in California. And what they did was bizarre, as only a group of lawyers who have lost all touch with reality can do. They argued to the federal courts that if a state like California or others with civil unions or domestic partnership laws, if they've gone that far to grant those rights to gays and lesbians in their communities, then somehow they are guilty of discrimination, which nullifies their marriage amendment. So, in essence, what they're saying is if you've been considerate and you have awarded these rights to gays and lesbians, you're sunk as a state, and you're now going to be forced, according to the legal theories of the Department of Justice, you would be forced to grant same-sex marriage to the whole state and overrule your own marriage statute. It's craziness, but that's what is being done right now.
Thanks, Bruce. Again, oral arguments in those cases begin March 26th. We'd also like to call your attention to the Focus on the Family daily broadcast that's airing on March 11th. Law professor and religious rights advocate Helen Alvarez will talk with Jim Daly about the erosion of marriage in America. To find a station near you, go to focusonthefamily.com. And we love hearing from you. Just drop us an email at mail@citizenlink.com. And please pray for your elected officials and for your nation. And remember, stand tall and be heard.